in the program it says Federal Statistical Research Data Centers. I just retitled it a little bit, Metadata for Confidential Microdata. And my name again is Todd Gardner. I'm in the Center for Economic Studies. And just as an overview, I wanted to run through basically what I'm going to be talking about and just get some acronyms out of the way. The Research Data Center Network has been renamed the Federal Statistical Research Data Center Network within the last couple of years as more agencies have partnered with the Census Bureau to make their data available to the research community. I'm also going to be talking about data linkage at the Census Bureau, specifically the CLIP project. CLIP stands for Census Longitudinal Infrastructure Project. It's our effort to make the data linkage infrastructure available to the research community. And then finally, I'm going to address the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at the University of Michigan. The ICPSR has built a Census Bureau data repository for us to collaborate with the Census Bureau for disseminating our data. Okay, so with confidential microdata, there are sort of an extra set of problems that arise. In the data sets that I should say my responsibility within the research data centers is I administer the demographic and decennial microdata files for research use. And I deal with several of the program areas across the Census Bureau. Many of the surveys have external sponsors. And these program areas collect data for a specific purpose, and they're often not thinking about the future research use of their data. And much of the documentation is rather limited. It has limited information about the variables. It's almost never in a structured format. It's unstructured or semi-structured. And a problem that we've encountered recently that's caused a lot of problems is that it's still protected by Title 13, and so you can't freely disseminate the metadata. So the FSRDCs are partnerships between federal statistical agencies and leading research institutions. They're secure facilities managed by the Census Bureau to provide access to restricted use microdata for statistical purposes only. And the first RDC was at Census headquarters. It started sometime in the 1980s. A couple more RDCs were added in the 90s, Boston with NBER and Carnegie Mellon. And when I started at CES in 2008, there were a handful of research data centers. And just in the last decade, the system has expanded rapidly. There are now 28 FSRDCs open, with 3 more opening within a few months. So you can see here we have good geographic coverage now for the whole country as the research data center network expands. We make a wide variety of data available to researchers in the RDCs. We have many economic data sets, quite a few individual and household survey data sets, including the Decennial Census, the American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, American Housing Survey, SIP, the National Crime Victimization Survey, and then also some of the researchers use the LEHD data, which is a linked data set that was created inside the Census Bureau, and then a wide variety of administrative records are available too. And so recently we've been emphasizing more linked data projects. The Census Bureau relies on record linkage for the strategic reuse of administrative data. That is, we've brought in records from a variety of federal agencies and are able to uniquely identify the individuals, and we run all those administrative data sets through our person identification verification system and attached our internal protected identification keys, or PICs, to those person records. They can be linked to any other data set. And so what I mentioned earlier, the CLIP project, uses the Census Bureau's record linkage infrastructure to create longitudinal data sets for demographic analyses, and that's what I've been focusing my efforts on quite a bit in the last few months. The the potential linkages, this is certainly not a comprehensive diagram here of all the linkages that can be made, but the core data sets for the CLIP project are the decennial census and ACS files, and because those were really the most troublesome one in terms of getting approval to do research, and that's because these are mandatory surveys, and any linkage of mandatory surveys required a very high level of approval. And until CLIP established its sort of governance structure, those almost were never approved. So that's been a relatively recent innovation, is the ability to link mandatory surveys. But CLIP is not limited to that. You can also link in household survey data sets, administrative records, and then there's a variety of external data sources that we've been in the process of acquiring. So CLIP has a number of goals. First is to refine the matching procedures and improve the accuracy of our person identification verification system, and to understand the biases introduced by our matching procedures. And then we can create a variety of new data products. We can either enhance existing data with fields from linked data files, or actually create new data products altogether. And then CLIP is also focused on our research efforts. All the CLIP projects right now are collaborations between an internal researcher and external researchers that are working on some sort of project. And so we want to expand the academic collaboration and research efforts that are going on, and also just generally improve social and economic measurement. So the working environment for researchers, this is true inside, this applies more to the research data centers, but it's also more or less true for internal research projects. But each research project has its own area within the research environment. And the only thing that our research projects in the RDCs have access to are the data sets that are approved to use, and an internal website we call the RDC doc. And it contains information for researchers, including documentation for the restricted use data sets. The RDC doc is also available internally inside the Census Bureau, but I found over the years that very few people know that it even exists. But it has basically all the documentation that we've collected. At least, I'll just speak to just the demographic and decennial files, because I'm not sure exactly how extensive it is for the economic data sets. But it's all the data, it's all the documentation I've been able to collect from the program areas that's relevant to the demographic and decennial files that we make available to researchers. So it also has a survey forms archive, the technical notes series, and that's the technical notes series are just any notes that researchers want to provide us, like any anomaly they find in the data or anything special methods they had to use because of difficulties they encountered during their research project. They'll write up as they close out their projects, they'll write up a technical note, and those are available through the RDC doc. I've put up a number of geographic reference materials, just as I've collected them in the time that I've been in CES. There's also software documentation, and then you can also see a history of data releases within the CES data warehouse. The RDC doc has a number of problems associated with it. One is that it's difficult to maintain. It's very old technology. It still uses frames. It's just the links are all they're just to sometimes to directory pages, or not even a page. You know how when you go to a directory that doesn't have an index.html page, it just shows you what files are in that directory. So the RDC doc is kind of an ad hoc collection of just anything we think will be available, useful to researchers, and not a whole lot of attention paid to, let's say, user friendliness. And then the other problem is that it's not available to the public. It's only available internally. And so what we've been trying to do is partner with ICPSR at Michigan, and they've established a repository for the Census Bureau for data and metadata cleared for public release. So ICPSR has a long time preserved and disseminated survey instruments, specifications, data dictionaries, code books, and other materials provided by the Census Bureau. So this repository that what I was just showing a minute ago, the front page for that repository, is really gathering together all those old materials, but then adding the capability for those of us inside the Census Bureau to upload materials and create new entries in that repository. So right now, when you do a search on restricted, all you'll see are just the very few restricted use metadata files that we've been able to clear through disclosure review. And those are just the historical decennial microdata, the metadata for the historical decennial microdata files. Other than that, we're still working on establishing a pipeline through the Disclosure Review Board to get more metadata release so it can go up online at ICPSR, and then researchers will be able to find it and use the metadata they find in the Census Bureau repository at ICPSR to determine whether or not a research idea they have is even feasible. So that's one of the goals, is to make the proposal process more efficient, to start down at the bottom of my list here. But the idea is that it's going to allow researchers to be able to know before they even approach an RDC administrator or set about to write their research proposal, if we have the data available internally that will answer their research question, have all the variables they need, and whether or not the file has enough cases for them to be able to do their research. It'll also improve transparency by providing this inventory of data sets and enable the public to learn about the data the government collects. So the biggest challenge right now from where I sit is establishing some kind of means of getting things through disclosure efficiently. That doesn't exist yet. We've been working toward that, trying to establish what standards we need to, what threshold we need to exceed to prove that there's no disclosure risk by releasing metadata. Just making the process as simple as possible without sacrificing anything to disclosure. We also need to convert the metadata to a structured format. I'm hoping somehow through partnering with ICPSR that we will be able to bring resources together. I don't know exactly how that's going to happen, but I hope that's the case. And then another project I've been working on is harmonizing of data and documentation, because right now anyone who's tried to use multiple data sets knows oftentimes it's difficult to do your own harmonization. I'm working with the Minnesota Population Center on a long-term project to harmonize the decennial and ACS data along the lines of we're using actually the same software that they use to make the IPUMs. And so we're trying to decide what to call it, because the P and U in IPUMs means public use. So it's referred to now as the IPUMs format internal microdata. And we are on our second release of it now. It's only the sample data, the long-form decennial data, and we're working on expanding that in the coming months to be all of the historical decennial microdata as well as ACS data harmonized into a unified database that will also include standardized documentation, standardized metadata, similar to what's available on the IPUMS website through the Minnesota Population Center for the public use data. So the public use data and the internal data will sort of go hand in hand together. You'll be able to do a lot of, if you want to use the harmonized data for an internal research project, you'll be able to do a lot of prep work using the public use versions of the IPUMS data. And then finding some way to more effectively incorporate user notes into the metadata. The technical note series is a good start, but providing some kind of forum where users can discuss difficulties they run into and ask other users for input. Like if you're having trouble reconciling some problem with the data, that maybe there's some other researcher out there who's had the same problem and would be available to answer that question. The IPM's website has something like that for public use data, but it's much easier in that case because there's no confidentiality problem. It's all public use data. But with a certain amount of moderation, a moderated website, we could potentially make that kind of service available for internal researchers too. And I know we're running behind time, so I'll just stop there and take any questions you might have.